A groundbreaking discovery in Egypt stuns experts. When you hear the word mummy, you might get a chill down your spine. The past holds secrets, and we're here to uncover them. Join us on this epic journey through time. Like and subscribe now to be part of the discovery. That creepy feeling is probably because most of us associate mummies with scary characters from horror movies. But in reality, mummies have helped us understand a lot about ancient civilizations, their rulers, and how people used to deal with the loss of loved ones. When it comes to mummies, no one is more famous than the ancient Egyptians. They believed in some form of life after death, but only if certain conditions were met. That's why they preserved the human body through mummification and placed it in a richly furnished tomb, basically like giving it a fully equipped apartment for the afterlife.
Why did they believe in this? Because they were deeply connected to the natural world around them. They noticed life cycles, like the daily rising and setting of the sun, or how plants could grow again even after they seemed to die. These patterns shaped their beliefs. They also believed in powerful spiritual beings like Osiris, the god linked to death and resurrection. Osiris played a big role in their ideas about the afterlife. To prepare for it, the Egyptians developed specific rituals, like mummification. This process used substances like honey, resin, and incense to preserve the body.
And when it comes to mummies, none is more iconic than King Tutankhamun, or King Tut. He was a young pharaoh who ruled Egypt more than 3,000 years ago. The problem with discovering royal tombs is that most of them were looted a long time ago. People knew the pharaohs were buried with a ton of valuable stuff, so many tombs got robbed.
But when King Tut's tomb was discovered in 1922, everyone was amazed because it hadn't been looted. It was so well hidden. Inside, his mummy was placed in 3 coffins, one of which was made of solid gold. The items found in his tomb gave us a clear picture of what life was like in ancient Egypt. Studying his mummy also gave us insight into the culture, the customs of the time, and even his health. Scientists found out through DNA analysis that he had malaria and a foot problem that may have made walking difficult.
Another famous pharaoh was Ramses II, who ruled for an incredible 68 years, a long time back then. He was known for expanding Egypt's territory and launching massive construction projects. Many things from his time still exist, including a giant statue of him. Ramses II weighed about 6 tons and lived to be around 90 years old. After examining his mother's remains, scientists think he may have had a spinal condition. Remember those tomb robbers we talked about? They may be the reason Ramses II ended up in a plain coffin, hidden among a secret group of royal mummies in Deir el-Bahari, rediscovered in 1881. Thankfully, archaeologists could identify him thanks to records on his coffin.
The mummification process itself was extremely detailed and could take up to 70 days. A special person would say precise prayers while carefully handling and drying the body using a natural salt called natron. They also used linen and resin to make the body look lifelike.
Wrapping the body wasn't the only important part. The tomb itself had to be just right.
For example, King Tut's tomb walls were decorated with intricate art, showing his journey to the afterlife, from his funeral procession to his travel through the underworld. The ancient Egyptians believed that everyone made this journey after death, so they filled their tombs with items and paintings to help the dead on their spiritual voyage. They even decorated tomb walls with spells from a special book, a collection of poems meant to guide the dead to the afterlife. And speaking of how important this journey was, people would leave food in the tombs too. In King Tut's tomb, archaeologists found 36 jars of ancient drinks and 8 baskets of fruit, all believed to be left to help him on his way. Since they believed the journey to the afterlife took a long time, they made sure to pack enough supplies, food, water, clothes, and more to take care of their loved ones.
Pharaohs were usually buried with luxurious clothing and beautiful jewelry to make sure their trip was as stylish as possible. These items included all kinds of fine linen clothes like tunics, scarves, gloves, and headpieces. There were also plenty of gold and gemstone accessories, bracelets, pins, necklaces, rings, and even fancy beetle-shaped charms for protection. Some were buried with ivory fans too.
Ostrich feathers, boats, and mysterious castles. More secrets from the ancient world. Ancient Egyptians even used ostrich feathers to help keep cool in the afterlife. Some pharaohs were buried in their eternal apartments along with boats. For example, Pharaoh Khufu built the Great Pyramid of Giza as his tomb, and a huge boat was found buried near it. King Tut, on the other hand, didn't have an actual boat in his tomb, but he was buried with many boat paddles. Instead of a boat, he had 3 chariots and a bunch of walking sticks made of valuable materials. This might mean he preferred traveling on land rather than by water in the afterlife.
One of the coolest things found near mummies is bottles of oils and perfumes. After all, if the pharaohs were going to look good in the afterlife, why not smell good too, right? Some of them even had ancient board games buried with them, most made from fancy materials like gold or ivory. One of the popular games was called Senet, kind of like ancient chess. It was super popular in Egypt at the time.
Now, while the Egyptians might have the most famous mummies, they weren't the first to invent mummification. That honor goes to an ancient South American civilization called the Chinchorro. As far as we know, they were the first people to preserve their dead through mummification, doing it about 2,000 years before the Egyptians started their own rituals.
Fascinating, isn't it? The Chinchorro civilization really set the stage for what would become one of the most iconic practices in ancient history.
Studying these ancient mummies has taught us a lot about the past, but until recently, we had no idea what these people actually looked like when they were alive.
That changed when archaeologists discovered a few very special mummy portraits, incredibly detailed paintings of individuals created while they were still alive.
These portraits were usually painted on wood, not canvas like traditional paintings we know today. They're known for being very realistic and beautiful, and researchers have even used them to diagnose diseases by comparing the paintings to the mummies themselves.
Some portraits even show jewelry that was later found with the bodies. The recent discovery of these portraits in central Egypt was a big deal. It was the first time such paintings had been found in over a century. But mummies didn't just come from Egypt.
Sometimes mummification happened naturally, no human intervention, due to extreme cold, heat, low oxygen, or chemical exposure. These conditions stopped bacteria from growing, so the bodies stayed surprisingly intact.
One famous example is Otzi the Iceman, who lived around 5,000 years ago in Europe. When he was found in the Alps in 1991, authorities first thought he was a modern mountain climber who had died recently. He was that well preserved.
But after removing him from the ice, scientists realized he was actually from the Copper Age.
Speaking of strange and fascinating stories, let's fast forward to 1923 in Florida, USA. 2 teenagers snuck out of their homes late at night after hearing a rumor about an old man who was building a rock castle by himself. But whenever anyone tried to watch, the old man would stop working.
The curious teens managed to sneak into the yard and saw something they'd later describe as magical. They said they saw huge stones floating like helium balloons. The old man, named Ed, was somehow moving 30-ton stones by himself.
Even though he never let anyone watch him work, he proudly talked about his project around town. But when people asked how he was doing it all alone, his answer was always the same. I've discovered the secret of the pyramids.
So who was this mysterious man? His full name was Edward Leedskalnin, and he was born on January 12, 1887, in a small village. He came from a family of builders, so he may have picked up some ancient techniques early on.
But Ed was also a sickly child, which meant he couldn't lift much or do intense physical labor. At age 26, a heartbreak changed his life. His fiancée broke off their engagement, and Ed, devastated, moved to the U.S. He lived in a couple of states before settling in Florida, where his life's big project began.
He spent years searching for the perfect piece of land to build his dream home. People were confused because he kept rejecting fertile farmland, but he finally bought a piece of rocky land that his friends thought was useless. Ed, however, saw it as perfect for what he had in mind.
His friends often described him as eccentric, and when asked why he was building a home, he'd just say, "It's for my sweet 16. She'll come back one day." Then he'd quickly change the subject.
Ed spent nearly 30 years building what would later be known as the Coral Castle, and he did it all by himself. He only worked at night and never let anyone see him in action. Coral Castle is full of unsolved mysteries. If you visited the site back in the day, you'd have to enter through a 9-ton, 8-foot-tall revolving stone door. And believe it or not, even a child could push it open with one finger.
Ed was so proud of this door that he originally named the place Rockgate Park. It wasn't called Coral Castle until long after he died. Once inside, visitors could explore the incredible things Ed built. Towers, mystical symbols, furniture, and even swinging chairs, all made from massive blocks of solid stone. He didn't use any cement or glue. The stones were simply stacked with their own weight, keeping them in place. In total, the entire park weighs about 1,100 tons.
If you visited Ed's living quarters, you'd even see the simple tools he used: chisels, hammers, ropes, and pulleys. The kind of work he did is tough even with modern equipment, let alone doing it all by hand. The biggest mystery is how Ed managed to build all of this by himself. The only photo of him working shows a basic wooden tripod made from old telephone poles with a small wooden box on top and a simple block and tackle system. What was inside that box? No one knows.
Sadly, Ed took his secrets to the grave. He never told anyone exactly how he did it, but that hasn't stopped people from coming up with theories. One theory suggests that there's an invisible energy grid in the Earth that creates anti-gravity zones in certain spots, and that Coral Castle might sit on one of those spots. That could explain why Ed spent so long searching for just the right piece of land. Maybe he was looking for a place where he could tap into this strange force.
Still, when Ed talked about his work, he always said he simply understood the laws of weight and leverage and that he had figured out the secrets of the pyramids. According to Ed, the real secret was magnetism. He even wrote a booklet called Magnetic Current, where he explained that every object contains magnetic particles, and that if you understood where those particles were, you could move heavy things with almost no effort. Kind of like trying to move something underwater where it feels lighter.
Some researchers believe that if Ed and the ancient pyramid builders really used the same method, it would have only taken about 4,700 workers to build the Great Pyramid, not the 20,000 to 100,000 that historians estimate today. But the story only gets weirder. In the late 1920s, when Ed was finishing Coral Castle in Florida, rumors started to spread. Some folks believed he was hiding a stash of cash somewhere on the property. One night, a group of men broke into the castle hoping to rob him. They didn't find any money, and thankfully they didn't hurt Ed, but after that scare, he decided it was time to move.
But he didn't just pack a suitcase. Ed moved the entire Coral Castle, stone by stone, 10 kilometers away to its current location in Homestead, Florida. According to legend, he hired a truck driver, made him swear to secrecy, and asked him to look away while Ed loaded everything by himself. He somehow moved tons of stone without help or machines. The castle stayed in Homestead, and it's still there today.
In 1986, engineers from the University of Florida were called in to repair the famous 9-ton revolving door. They brought modern equipment, including a 20-ton crane, to do the job. When they removed the door, they found that Ed had placed a weird round rock about the size of a frisbee underneath it as a base. None of the engineers could understand how that small rock was able to support the massive weight of the door without breaking. They sent it to the geology department at the university, but the geologists couldn't identify the rock or match it to anything in their databases.
The engineers eventually reinstalled the door, trying different methods. But it didn't work like it used to, not without Ed's original rock. So they had to cut into the stone to make it spin again. Even with today's tools, they couldn't replicate what Ed did by hand.
Fast forward to 2011, and a man named Wally Wallington, a retired construction worker from Michigan, claimed he had figured out the same secret that Ed and the pyramid builders knew. Wallington is known for building a replica of Stonehenge by himself in Michigan, using simple tools like levers and counterweights, no heavy machinery. A guy moved around multi-ton concrete blocks, just like Ed, but unlike him, Wallington actually shared his techniques with the public. There are several videos showing his clever engineering, all built from super simple materials. It's definitely impressive. He even moved an entire barn to a different property using just basic tools.
Still, there's no real proof that Wellington used the exact same techniques that built Coral Castle. The secrets of Coral Castle remain unsolved to this day. But hey, we can always keep trying to crack the code. Now jump back to the year 1898. You're part of an excavation in Saqqara, not far from Cairo, a place full of ancient tombs and pyramids. You're feeling like Indiana Jones, hoping to uncover something huge, golden scrolls, treasure maps, or a famous pharaoh's mummy, but then you find a wooden bird.
At first, you're really disappointed. It looks like a regular old toy. What you don't know is that years later, someone will suggest that this toy might actually be an ancient model of a glider. Known today as the Saqqara bird, it's made from sycamore wood, has a 7-inch wingspan, and weighs about 40 grams, like a little souvenir from ancient Egypt. It's believed to be over 2,000 years old. It doesn't have feathers or fancy carvings, just a beak and eyes, making it look like a falcon, the symbol of the god Horus. The tail is oddly flat and vertical, and there's a groove in the back that may have held a now missing part.
Of course, humans love a good mystery, so people have come up with lots of theories about what this bird was used for. One idea, it was just a ceremonial object. Another theory, it was a child's toy, maybe a boomerang-style glider. Those were pretty common in ancient Egypt. Others thought it might have been part of a religious ritual, but that theory got debunked since the bird has no holes or markings except the ones added later by the Cairo Museum to mount it on a stick, meaning it probably wasn't meant to hang or fly originally.
Almost a century after the bird was found, an Egyptologist named Dr. Khalil MSA came up with a new theory. He believed the bird was a model of a single-wing aircraft. He claimed that if it had a horizontal tail stabilizer, like modern planes, and the wings were set at the right angle, it could generate aerodynamic lift and actually glide. Dr. MSA pointed out that Egyptians sometimes buried miniature prototypes of inventions in tombs. So, did the ancient Egyptians invent flight in 200 BCE? If so, the Wright brothers, who only took off in 1903, might not be the original inventors after all.
There's only one way to test the bird, but the Cairo Museum isn't exactly going to let someone take their artifact for a spin. So Martin Gregory, a glider designer, built a replica out of balsa wood. His verdict, even without the missing tail stabilizer, it wasn't really a great flyer. Case closed. Not quite. It wasn't convincing enough for the History Channel, so they got an aerodynamics expert to build another version and test it in weather conditions similar to Egypt's. Surprisingly, it flew pretty well. If the Egyptians really made a prototype of a plane, that would make the Saqqara bird an out-of-place artifact, a piece of tech way ahead of its time. And the Saqqara bird isn't the only one. In 1901, divers discovered the Antikythera mechanism in a shipwreck near a Greek island. It's been called the world's first analog computer, and it dates back to around 100 BCE. This bronze device could track the positions of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, calculate eclipse dates, and even show how fast the moon moved across the sky.
No one knows exactly who made it or how it worked, but it's shockingly advanced for its time. Want another surprise? You might think that flushing toilets were invented in the mid-1900s. Nope, just kidding. The Minoans on the island of Crete and the Indus Valley civilization actually came up with them around 4,000 years ago. Their plumbing and sewage systems were so advanced, no one improved much on them for the next 2,000 years.
In the palace of Knossos, they found a Minoan toilet with a wooden seat over a tunnel that directed water from a rooftop tank into an underground sewer. Other types used pitchers of water instead. Of course, only the wealthy could afford such luxury. So if you were house hunting back then, one of the top features to look for would be a working toilet. Back in the day, having a toilet basically meant you were living in a rich neighborhood.
Now, you might think automatic doors are a recent invention, like something cool that came along in 1931. But the tech behind them actually goes way back, like all the way to the 1st century AD. A mathematician and engineer named Heron of Alexandria created a hydraulic system to open and close temple doors.
Here's how it worked. You lit a fire to produce heat under a half-filled copper pot which was connected to containers acting as weights. As the fire heated the water, it moved into those containers, making them heavier, and they pulled on ropes to open the doors. Was it like the doors at a supermarket that slide open the second you walk in? Not even close. Heron's doors took hours to open, and once they started, there was no way to stop them. That's why they only opened them once a day, to create a bit of mystery and awe during temple ceremonies.
And speaking of things that seem spooky or way ahead of their time, the first battery might have been invented in Baghdad nearly 2,000 years ago. In 1938, a German archaeologist found an oval-shaped clay jar that could have produced around 1 volt of electricity. Scientists still aren't exactly sure what it was for or who made it.
One theory, it was used for electroplating, coating objects in precious metals using a weak acid like vinegar. Another theory says it was just a container for sacred scrolls.
Now here's a fun one. Did you know Leonardo da Vinci came up with an idea for contact lenses in 1508? He designed a glass lens with a funnel, meant to be worn with water inside to improve vision. Sounds kinda uncomfortable, right?
About 100 years later, a French scientist named René Descartes tried to improve it. He came up with a design where the lens touched the eye directly, which helped with vision, but blinking was impossible. Not ideal. It took another 250 years for scientists to finally create contact lenses that were actually wearable.
New glass-making techniques made it possible to design lenses that fit the eye and even let people blink. Thanks, science! But those lenses were still made from thick, heavy glass that didn't let the eye breathe.
Fast forward about 50 years, and contact lenses finally became plastic, lightweight, unbreakable, and scratch-resistant. But they still covered the whole eye. Then in 1948, a British optical technician accidentally sanded down a plastic lens and discovered it could stay in place even if it only covered the cornea. A total game changer. Now picture living in 19th century London and you want to send a message to New York. It would have taken about 10 days by ship.
But then in 1858, delivery time dropped to just a few hours. A huge deal back then. That first message? It was sent by Queen Victoria herself.
All thanks to the transatlantic telegraph cable, which was laid under the ocean. Sadly, the cable only worked for a few weeks before breaking, and it took years to repair and bring it back. Here's something more recent and eerie. A few years ago in Egypt, archaeologists discovered 16 human right hands buried in 4 strange pits.
At first, they didn't even look human because they were unusually large. And there were no left hands, only rights. Turns out, this might be linked to a dark ancient ritual. Old Egyptian art and texts describe a ceremony where warriors would cut off the right hands of their enemies as a symbol of victory, and then ask for gold in exchange.
Since the Egyptians believed in the afterlife, taking someone's hand meant cutting off their power forever. Brutal but powerful.
The hands are believed to come from a battle between the Egyptians and the Hyksos, a group from what used to be called Canaan.
Egypt has always been the center of history-changing discoveries. One of the most jaw-dropping, a massive papyrus scroll.
If you unroll it, it's as tall as the world's smallest skyscraper, which is in Wichita Falls, Texas. Back before people had smartphones and notes apps, they wrote on papyrus, made from the plant of the same name.
About 2,000 years ago, Egyptians used it to write something that's kind of like a book. A guide to their traditions, beliefs, and visions of the afterlife.
It's considered one of the most important ancient Egyptian texts, and believe it or not, you can still find copies of it in bookstores today. That's the magic of history.
Subscribe to join us in reliving the forgotten past. Like, share, and support the journey to uncover the truth beneath the ruins. Until next time.